Young Charlie by Hollywood and Crime contains depictions of violence and is not suitable for everyone. Please be advised.
On November 17, 1969, Ronnie Howard was waiting for a bus outside Sybil Brand Detention Center in downtown L.A. She was due to appear in a Santa Monica court on a forgery charge. Deciding she couldn't live with herself if more people were killed by Susan Atkins or her friends, Ronnie had confided to a deputy that her cellmate was responsible for the Tate and LaBianca murders. The deputy passed the information on to her superior, who didn't seem interested. When Ronnie asked again, the deputy told her to just forget about it. Ronnie pleaded with the woman to call the LAPD herself, or more people would die. The deputy had informed her that making a call on behalf of an inmate was against the rules. Now, as she waited for the bus that would take her to Santa Monica, Ronnie Howard got in line with the other women inmates, hoping to use the payphone. Afraid she wouldn't get to the head of the line before the bus arrived, she paid the two girls in front of her 50 cents to cut ahead. When she got the LAPD on the line, a homicide officer said he'd send a car over to pick her up immediately. Just then, the transport bus arrived. Ronnie told the officer she'd be in court all day and he should send someone there. Then she hung up the phone. She had forgotten to tell the officer which court. You can listen to episodes of Young Charlie and Hollywood and Crime right now on Spotify. Download Spotify today to access it from your phone or desktop and listen to Young Charlie for free. From Wondery, I'm Tracy Pattin with Stephen Lang. Today, Hollywood and Crime presents Young Charlie. If you're joining us for the first time, we recommend you go back and listen to the previous episodes. We'll be waiting for you. Today's episode, Slippies. Here's my co-host, Stephen Lang.
Everything is contained within Charlie's philosophy. It's a circle that completes itself because he is its beginning and its end. When he is gentle, the lesson is love. And when he yanks on Pat's hair or gives Mary a smack, it's obedience. They are lucky to have found him amid their aimless wanderings, because above all, Charlie provides them with direction. When Mary quits her job, they survive by the scrounging techniques they'd learned from the diggers in Haight-Ashbury. Or they find wayward hippies willing to share their parents' credit cards. But San Francisco's summer of love is quickly descending into chaos, with the influx of young people needing to be housed and fed. By late 1967, drug overdoses are increasingly common, and clinics fight to contain outbreaks of infectious disease. Peace and love have devolved into drug wars and competing gurus. Charlie decides it's time to start planning for his triumphal return to L.A. and the launch of his musical career. In order to make the proper impression, he needs an entourage worthy of his talents. He has had no luck bringing men into the fold, and they would be needed for muscle and technical know-how. His plan to use his women as bait has not panned out. Two plain girls and a skinny redhead are little enticement in a world where sex is had with a nod and a smile. All that changes when he meets a former topless dancer named Susan Atkins. It's at a small party in the Haight, and Charlie is the center of attention, strumming his guitar and crooning improvised tunes in his quavering voice. She locks onto him with laser focus, radiating raw sexuality and a willingness to do anything. They have sex that night, and he whispers in her ear to think of him as her father. She is amazed at how he can spot the broken parts of her and repair them with a word or touch. Before the night is over, she knows she will follow him into hell if he asks her. Think of me as your father, your lover, the alpha and omega of all that is and all that will be.
On the same day that Ronnie Howard made her call to the LAPD, detectives working the LaBianca case were interviewing straight Satan biker Danny DiCarlo. In addition to identifying a photo of the likely murder weapon, Danny recalled a night in August when several family members had bragged about killing 5 piggies. The biker provided another helpful detail. He had seen 3-strand nylon cord at the ranch, the same kind that had been tied around the necks of Sharon Tate and Jay Sebring. While Danny was being questioned, another team had tracked down Ronnie Howard at Sybil Brand. They were impressed enough by her testimony to have her immediately removed from the cell she shared with Susan Atkins. Crazy Sadie had provided her cellmate with a detail only the killers would know: the bloody words scribbled at the LaBianca home. When the different teams compared notes, there were several discrepancies. Danny DiCarlo had maintained that no women had gone along on the murder spree, while Susan had claimed that she and 2 other girls, a Katie and a Linda, were at Cielo Drive. Atkins had also talked about stabbing Gary Hinman, though Bobby Beausoleil had boasted to DiCarlo that he had killed the music teacher. The details of who had been at which murder scene were still fuzzy, but detectives now felt confident they knew the identity of the killers. And at least one other matter was cleared up. DiCarlo told investigators there was another Charles in the family. The detectives had heard of a Charles Montgomery from Kitty Lutzinger and asked if that might be his last name. Danny said it didn't sound familiar, but everyone knew the guy as Tex.
By late 1967, Mary is overjoyed to learn she's pregnant. She may never be able to contain Charlie's spirit, but she will always have this part of him. Charlie tells her that babies are the only creatures that are pure, and in the new world he has set about creating, children will be raised to be the free beings they are meant to be. With their growing family, they trade the VW in for an old school bus and paint Hollywood Productions on the side. The street corners and dive clubs of the hate might be a place to hone your craft. But if you were going to be bigger than the Beatles, San Francisco doesn't cut it. Band after band has realized this. Big Brother and the Holding Company, the Jefferson Airplane, even the Grateful Dead. Charlie knows his destiny lies 400 miles to the south, in that beckoning oasis between desert and sea. Armed with the name of a producer at Universal, given to him by a fellow inmate, Charlie piles his expanding family into the school bus and departs for L.A. Within days, they find lodging at the Spiral Staircase, a sprawling house in Topanga Canyon whose owner makes it available to L.A. hippies and hopeful musicians. Charlie spends his days playing guitar and spouting philosophy with a constantly shifting population of house guests before meeting one with whom he feels an instant kinship. Bobby Beausoleil is everything Charlie is not. Young, handsome, able to attract women with barely a word. And he's an excellent musician, having taught himself guitar as a boy, even singing backup for Frank Zappa. Charlie immediately sees him as an asset, perhaps even a musical collaborator. And with his looks, Beausoleil might be able to lure more women into the group. Bobby makes it clear he's not a joiner, but the two agree to stay in touch. Before taking off with his latest fling, Bobby introduces Charlie to a friend who lives nearby in Topanga. Gary Hinman is a music teacher who deals drugs on the side and is always generous in letting people crash at his place.
Vincent Bugliosi was unimpressed the first time he laid eyes on Charles Manson. The leader of the cult known as the Family and purported second coming of Christ was just over 5 feet tall, slender and slightly stooped. He was barely visible past the bodies of the 5 detectives escorting him from the Inyo County Jail to court for his arraignment on the arson charge. Bearded and long-haired, dressed head to toe in buckskins, he seemed little discomfited by the handcuffs. When the young deputy district attorney had been assigned prosecution of the Tate homicides on November 18th, the police were confident they knew who the killers were. Susan Atkins had confessed to Ronnie Howard and Virginia Graham, her cellmates at Sybil Brand. She had implicated herself in the murders of Sharon Tate and her friends, as well as the LaBiancas and musician Gary Hinman. They knew that a Charles was involved, almost certainly cult leader Manson, still in residence at the Inyo County Jail on the arson and theft charges. So Bugliosi had driven out to Independence to interview family members Lynette Squeaky Fromm and Sandra Good. Neither admitted any knowledge of the Tate, LaBianca, or Hinman murders, spouting little beyond platitudes about love and karma and the incomprehensibility of time. Bugliosi came away with the disturbing impression that he was getting robotic responses. There was a vacancy behind their eyes. They appeared programmed, down to their beatific smiles whenever they referred to Charlie. But Bugliosi also suspected that fear might be a component of their performance. Confined in the small jail at Independence, anything they said would likely be passed on to other family members. The decision was made to transfer 5 of the girls to Sybil Brand and isolate them from each other and from Susan Atkins. One of the transferees was a slender, attractive young woman who had been booked under the name Leslie Sankston.
Nothing in Charlie's first audition indicates his musical gifts will propel him to superstar status beyond that of the Beatles. He shows up at Universal and proudly escorts producer Gary Stromberg around his school bus, refitted into a living quarters of sorts. The 4 girls, Mary, Lynette, Pat, and Susan, are there to ply the executive with donuts and hints of sexual availability. Stromberg is intrigued by the diminutive musician's sway over his little entourage, how the women hang on his every syllable, eagerly awaiting his next command. But when they get into the recording studio, it's clear Charlie is out of his element. He seems put off by the technology, unable to communicate his needs to the engineers or respond to their directives. And yet, Stromberg thinks there might be something in Charlie's tunes. He's raw and far from a producible album. But the world of music is in flux, and you never know who might turn out to be the next phenom. He recommends that Charlie keep working on his material and maybe return at a later date. Charlie is not disheartened by the experience, but more convinced than ever he needs to follow his own path. There will be someone out there who will understand what he's trying to do and allow him the freedom to do it. What Charlie needs is a benefactor.
Hollywood and Crime is supported by ADT. ADT knows that home isn't just a place, it's a feeling. The feeling that you're safe to enjoy the things that matter most. Whether for your home or business, ADT will help you feel protected. Introducing the ADT Security Starter Kit. Now for a limited time, get everything you need to get started with ADT Pulse, including a security panel, keypad, a motion sensor, and 2 entry sensors. Plus, there's an indoor camera and key fob, all professionally installed for only $49. But this offer is only available for a limited time, so visit ADT.com/podcast now.
Requires 36-month monitoring contract, QSP, and Easy Pay. Activation and early termination fees may apply. Certain markets excluded. Licenses available at ADT.com/podcast. Florida EF 0001121, Louisiana F 1639. Visit ADT.com/podcast. Hurry, this special offer ends 11/27.
Love podcasts? Well, did you know you can listen to Young Charlie on Spotify while still enjoying your favorite tunes? It's the destination for all your audio, including Young Charlie and Hollywood and Crime. Just search for podcasts in the Browse tab in your Spotify app or head to spotify.com/podcasts. The woman booked in the Inyo County Jail as Leslie Sankston turned out to be Leslie Van Houten, a California native who had joined Charlie Manson's family in the summer of 1968. Interviewed by LAPD Sergeant Mike McGann, she decided to play games, often giving teasing or flippant responses. She would coyly suggest she knew something, then back off and play innocent. It became more of a catch-me-if-you-can child's game than an attempt to address her possible involvement in multiple murders. But Deputy D.A. Bugliosi was not discouraged. However she tried to obscure the facts, there were pointers and tacit admissions in what she had to say. When asked if she'd heard anything about the Tate murders, she joked that she was deaf and couldn't hear anything. But at a later point, she would say she had a pretty good idea what had gone on at Cielo Drive. When Sergeant McGann suggested Charlie was one of 5 killers at the Tate residence, Leslie corrected him, claiming she had heard only 4 people were there and Charlie wasn't one of them. She had also heard that there were probably more girls than men, and one of the girls hadn't killed anyone. When McGann asked who the girl was, Leslie said her name was Linda, though she didn't know the last name. This confirmed what detectives had learned from Ronnie Howard about a Linda who had been present at Cielo Drive but not the La Bianca residence. McGann then showed Leslie the mugshots taken at the Barker Ranch raid. She identified a Katie who had been booked under the name Marty Reeves and released a few days later. The same Katie had been arrested back in August at the raid on Spawn Ranch and given her name as Mary Sue Scott. Most significantly, Leslie confirmed that 3 girls had gone to the Tate residence on the night of August 9th: Sadie, Katie, and Linda.
By the spring of 1968, Charlie has made more headway in building a cult than a music career. Constantly in flux with new additions or dropouts, his group of followers has grown to around 20. Having moved on from the spiral staircase, he crashes in several of the houses that dot the wooded hills of Topanga Canyon, making occasional trips into the stark reaches of the Mojave Desert. By now, he has perfected his technique of finding potential converts, spotting their fragilities, and overwhelming them with his vision of a world in which they would emerge whole and fulfilled. All they have to do is let go of their egos. 14-year-old Diane Lake, already living on Wavy Gravy's hog farm commune, joins Charlie with her parents' blessing. Ruth Ann Morehouse rejoins him after a brief marriage to escape her parents' control. Sandy Good, another child of a broken home, meets Charlie on a trip to L.A. and immediately gives herself over to him in hopes of finding a true family. And Paul Watkins, a good-looking and engaging 18-year-old dropout, proves himself a valuable asset in attracting more young women. Of great importance in determining suitability to join the group is the girls' compliance in allowing Charlie complete control over their sexual lives. Those unwilling to submit to any sexual act with anyone at any time Charlie commands it are deemed unlikely to let go of the worldly attachments anchoring them to their prior lives. Lose your ego to gain your true identity. And your given name is only another attachment to your past, Charlie instructs them, renaming Susan Atkins Sadie Mae Glutz. Others quickly follow suit as Mary Brunner becomes Mother Mary, Diane Lake becomes Snake, and Ruth Ann Morehouse is renamed Wish. Pat Krenwinkel likes Katie, though she sometimes uses Marnie Reeves. For food, the group goes on scavenging expeditions to local supermarkets, searching dumpsters for still edible produce or meat. Sometimes the girls panhandle or ask for donations for made-up causes. One afternoon in late May, Pat and one of the newer girls, nicknamed Yeller, are hitchhiking on Sunset Boulevard when a car pulls over to pick them up. The driver invites them to his house for cookies and milk before driving them home. The girls are impressed with the guy's place, a mansion built to resemble a log cabin, and when they tell Charlie, they're surprised by the strength of his reaction. But for Charlie, this is exactly the turning point he's been waiting for. If ever there is a moment he knows that fate is reaching out to him, this is it. Not the old fate that shunned him at every turn, broke his dreams and tried to bend him to its will, but his reimagined fate, the one that bent to his will. He reviles his moments of hesitation and doubt. But like Christ before him, the flesh is weak. Didn't Jesus himself ask that his burden be lifted moments from Golgotha? But there can be no more doubt, no more hesitation. When you discover that you can will your own fate, the gravest sin is to stray from the path. He has come to L.A. in search of a patron, and his girls have stumbled upon a beach boy.
Greg Jacobson had been impressed by Charlie Manson. Though his musical gifts might still have been raw, he was a charismatic figure with his own brand of philosophy. The lyrics to his often spontaneously improvised songs were original, even compelling. The police were interested in talking to the talent scout because he had been the one to introduce Manson to record producer Terry Melcher, who owned the Cielo Drive property. When LAPD Sergeant Frank Patchett asked Jacobson if he knew a family member named Charles Tex Montgomery, Jacobson nodded. But Tex's last name wasn't Montgomery. It was Watson. On November 30th, Deputy DA Bugliosi ran a check and discovered that a Charles Denton Watson had been arrested in Van Nuys on a drug charge on April 23rd. When Watson's fingerprints taken at the time of his booking matched one of the Laytons found at the Tate residence, it was the first piece of physical evidence tying a Manson family member to the murders. Teams of detectives were sent out to Watson's former addresses with no luck. But when they checked his hometown of McKinney, Texas, Sheriff Tom Montgomery told them Watson was living in a small apartment downtown. In fact, the sheriff was well acquainted with Charles Watson. They were second cousins, Montgomery being a family name Tex sometimes used. Rather than sending officers to pick up the murder suspect, Sheriff Montgomery called Tex's Uncle Maurice, who picked up his nephew and delivered him to the local jail. Later that same Sunday, Sergeant Patchett interviewed Terry Melcher, who confirmed Greg Jacobson's account. Both men had met Charlie Manson the previous summer at the home of Beach Boy drummer Dennis Wilson. One night, Charlie had come along for the ride when Wilson drove Melcher back to his house. Though he hadn't gotten out of the car, Manson had, at least on one occasion, been to 10,050 Cielo Drive.
Dennis Wilson notices the lights on in his Sunset Boulevard home as he pulls into the driveway after a long night's session at the recording studio. Considering the constant flow of house guests at the log cabin mansion he's renting, there's nothing alarming in this. He is far more disconcerted, however, when the back door swings open and a small, scruffy figure emerges, gesticulating flamboyantly as if welcoming a long-awaited visitor. Concern yields to confusion as the man suddenly falls to his knees and starts kissing Dennis's feet. Then Charlie rises with a grin, ushering Dennis into his own home as if it's he who's the guest and Charlie the host. Loud music and the wafting smell of pot smoke greet the Beach Boy drummer as he walks into a party in full blossom. Pat and Yeller come over to formally introduce Charlie to their unwitting benefactor, who relaxes into the flow of the evening. Never one to turn down sex or drugs, Dennis grabs a joint and watches the topless girls gyrate to the tunes blaring from his stereo. Pretty soon, he's romping in bed with one or two of the girls, and it turns into a fine night indeed. In the morning, Dennis finds half-dressed young people wandering his halls and rooms, helping themselves to breakfast or using his shower. Charlie turns out to be a pretty interesting guy with his philosophy of freedom from earthly attachments, especially family. Considering Dennis's frequent rows with brother Brian and other bandmates, it's a welcome message. Charlie isn't shy about describing himself as a singer-songwriter in search of a recording contract. Well, if his music is anywhere near as good as his rap, this just might be Dennis's chance at a creative rebirth. Ever since the Beatles toppled the Beach Boys on the record charts, the brothers have been feuding. Could Charlie provide a way out of Dennis's musical doldrums? By the end of the morning, Dennis begins to consider the possibility that picking up those two hitchhikers might just be the best thing that's happened to him in a long time. Yes, he will try to help Charlie, and maybe Charlie can help him. Dennis decides to make a call. Greg Jacobson is exactly the guy who could get Charlie on track.
Deputy District Attorney Bugliosi felt confident that 3 of the Tate LaBianca killers were behind bars, though none had as yet been formally charged in those crimes. 2 other female suspects were still at large. Linda, whose name detectives had learned was Kasabian, was rumored to be living in a commune in New Mexico, and Marnie Reeves, a.k.a. Mary Sue Scott, a.k.a. Katie, was believed to be on a farm outside Mobile, Alabama. On Sunday, November 30th, attorney Richard Caballero, who was representing Susan Atkins in the Gary Hinman murder trial, paid the prosecutor a visit. He wanted to know what kind of deal might be in the offing for his client in the Tate and LaBianca cases. Bugliosi told him that if Susan agreed to be a witness for the prosecution, they would let her plead guilty to second-degree murder. She would receive a life sentence but avoid the death penalty. Caballero took that offer to his client, but Susan wavered. He presented her with the evidence the state had turned over in discovery and advised that she would likely be convicted and sentenced to death. Susan said she might be willing to testify before a grand jury, but not at trial against Manson and other family members. It appeared she had not lost faith in the man claiming to be the second coming of Christ.
At first, talent scout Greg Jacobson seems more taken with Charlie's female adherents than with his music. Charlie picks up on it and makes sure Ruth Ann Morehouse is available any time Greg comes around. Dennis Wilson has lost none of his enthusiasm for his de facto house guest and potential musical collaborator. He brings Charlie into audition for Brother Records, the company he's formed with the Beach Boys to discover new talent. But Charlie's is not the kind of talent that might impress the team, who are as irritated by his attitude and odor as they are by his lack of discipline and professionalism. Nobody other than Dennis sees anything commercially viable in this unkempt minstrel or his rather primitive tunes. Dennis might continue to tout his new protege's gifts as poet-philosopher, the wizard who is both God and the devil. The other Beach Boys hope Dennis will soon lose interest. Greg Jacobson also sees something in Charlie, though it isn't exactly what Charlie has hoped. Yes, there might be some musical ability there to be cultivated by the right producer, but what impresses Greg most about Charlie is the new society he's constructing in the desert outside L.A. When new recruit Sandy Good discovered the Spahn Ranch, it seemed an ideal location for Charlie's growing congregation, and they began the process of relocating. Used as a Western set for TV shows like Bonanza and Gunsmoke, Spahn was close enough to civilization to provide supplies, but isolated enough to be clear of voices that might conflict with Charlie's. To Jacobson, this tiny band of nomads, living freely and spontaneously in the shadow of mercantile excess, seems the fulfillment of a culture intent on redefining itself. He approaches his friend, record producer Terry Melcher, with the idea of funding a documentary about Charlie and his disciples, whom he now refers to as the family. The movie never goes beyond a few canisters of film shot at the ranch, but the name sticks. For Jacobson and Melcher and Dennis Wilson, Charlie's desert tribe has become the family.
Drunk driving fatalities are 100% preventable, and it's up to you to do your part. All it takes is for one person to give a damn to save lives. Take a lift, get a ride, designate a driver. Whatever you do, care enough to get home safely whenever alcohol is involved. Your friends, family, and neighbors will all thank you for it. This is a message from Budweiser, reminding you to give a damn. Don't drive drunk. On December 1st, Sheriff Tom Montgomery of McKinney, Texas, told the Los Angeles DA's office that unless he received an arrest warrant within 2 hours, he would set his cousin Tex Watson free. Vincent Bugliosi hurried down to file official charges against Watson in the Tate murders before the deadline expired. By now, it had been learned that a Joseph Krenwinkel had secured the release of Marnie Reeves following her arrest at the raid on Spawn Ranch back in August. Marnie Reeves, a.k.a. Mary Sue Scott, a.k.a. Katie, turned out to be Patricia Krenwinkel of Inglewood, California. Joseph cooperated with police, telling them his daughter was staying with her aunt in Mobile, Alabama. Within hours, Mobile authorities were at the aunt's door, but were told Patricia wasn't home. As the two officers drove away, they noticed a girl in another car quickly pull her hat down to hide her face. The car was stopped, and Patricia Krenwinkel was arrested for the California homicides. By early afternoon, December 1st, the only suspect still at large was Linda Kasabian. The following day, Kasabian turned herself in to authorities in Concord, New Hampshire. She admitted she'd been present at the Tate home and had witnessed the murders, but claimed she hadn't participated in them. She waived extradition and was flown back to Los Angeles. By the evening of December 3rd, authorities were confident that the 5 individuals responsible for the Tate and LaBianca killings were all behind bars.
It all seems to be coming together for Charlie. The fate he once cursed for its cruelties has been his benefactor, he now realizes, toughening him for the road to Jerusalem. It's the fool who counts his blessings and gives thanks. The wise man counts his hardships in the knowledge that it's the wounds and obstacles that forge a man's soul. Without prison, he would never have encountered the pimps and hustlers who gave him the tools to gather his lost tribe. Without the pain and isolation of his childhood, he would never have gained insight on how to transcend both. Every false step is a lesson, every slight a blessing. By late 1968, Charlie is splitting his time between Dennis Wilson's log cabin mansion and the Spahn Ranch. He's got Squeaky tending to old George Spahn's needs, and he's free to gather his troop of lost children for LSD-fueled lessons on what life will be like in the coming age of Charlie. And it isn't only these wayward travelers who sense the greatness in him. When Neil Young comes by the log cabin one afternoon, the two of them have an impromptu jam session, and Young walks away impressed. Charlie has an amazing ability to generate lyrics spontaneously, Young later tells a Warner Brothers producer, though nothing comes of it. Dennis and Greg Jacobson keep working on Terry Melcher to let Charlie audition. Terry, like Greg before him, seems more interested in Ruth Ann Morehouse than in the performer destined to be bigger than the Beatles. But Greg has come through for Charlie, booking him a session in a Van Nuys recording studio. Charlie walks away with some tapes to pass around to anyone willing to listen. Dennis thinks Charlie's original tune, Cease to Exist, is something he can work with. The prospect of being a Beach Boy collaborator piques Charlie's sense of hope and expectation. It's not the solo career he's imagined, but it's a step in that direction.
Attorney Richard Caballero had cut a good deal for his client. If Susan Atkins agreed to testify before the grand jury, the government would not seek the death penalty, nor would her testimony be used against her or any co-defendants at trial. Caballero had recorded her confession and played it for Bugliosi and several of the detectives. On the tape, Susan described the 2-night murder spree with the same casualness as when she asked for ice cream with her dinner. For the first time, investigators learned that Manson had not gone to Cielo Drive, but had sent Susan, Tex Watson, Patricia Krenwinkel, and Linda Kasabian. Susan admitted to stabbing Wojtek Frykowski, but claimed it was in self-defense. When it came to Sharon Tate, her story had changed from what she told cellmates Ronnie Howard and Virginia Graham. Now it was Tex Watson who'd stabbed the pregnant Sharon, while Susan held her. The following night, Manson accompanied them as they drove around looking for a suitable target. This time, family members Leslie Van Houten and Steve Grogan came along, with Kasabian behind the wheel. After looking at several potential murder sites, they found themselves at the LaBianca residence. The only connection seemed to be a next-door neighbor they had met on 1 or 2 occasions at drug parties. Charlie gained entry to the house and tied the couple up. Then he returned to the car and told Watson, Krenwinkel, and Van Houten to go inside and kill them. And that was it. In a 2-hour tape, Sadie Mae Glutz detailed the murderous events of those 2 nights in her high-pitched little girl's voice, giggling as she described Sharon Tate's last moments. Sharon went through quite a few changes, she laughed. Quite a few changes.
It isn't that Greg Jacobson fails to see the darker side of Charlie. Beyond the fuzzy talk of spiritual awakening and losing one's ego, Charlie drops hints of the racial and political strife he believes is about to engulf America. There are forces loosed in the cities and towns that are alien to the peace and love that so enraptures the post-World War II generation. Charlie disdains the middle-class origins of these kids and recoils at the label they've allowed to be attached to them through popular culture. His people are not hippies, he says, but slippies. That subpopulation of young people who've slipped through the cracks, unwanted and unwashed, foreigners in their own homes, as far removed from their peacenik brethren as dark is from light. He has no use for a generation of slumming posers, able to return to their comfortable lives whenever they choose. They tacitly accept society's values, even as they flout them. Their indulgence in free sex and drugs is as much to shock their parents as out of a real understanding that freedom means to give up everything. To die that you may live. Isn't that what the Bible teaches? Jacobson isn't put off by Charlie's rants, doesn't take them all that seriously. In the next instant, Charlie will slip back into his crooner mask and belt out an impromptu tune. You never knew which Charlie you were going to get, but he always held your interest. Around those he feels the need to impress, Charlie can be anything you want him to be.
On the witness stand before the grand jury, Susan Atkins described the activity known to the family as creepy crawling. Members would dress in dark clothes and sneak into random houses in the dead of night. Taking care not to wake the occupants, they would move silently through the house, sometimes rearranging things so in the morning the people would know their space had been invaded. Then Deputy District Attorney Vincent Bugliosi asked about the night of August 9th. Susan said that Charlie had instructed her and the other women to each bring a knife and a change of clothing and do whatever Tex Watson told them to. Once in the car, Tex said they were going to a house that had once belonged to Terry Melcher. They were to take any money they could find and kill whoever was in the house. When they got to 10,050 Cielo Drive, Tex shimmied up a pole and cut the phone lines. Then they parked down the street and walked back up the hill. Concerned the gate might have an alarm, they scurried up an incline to access the property. As they started toward the house, a car came down the driveway toward them. Tex ordered the driver to stop. Susan heard 4 shots, and when they passed the car, she could see the thing slumped across the front seat. The grand jury caught their breath as Bugliosi asked for clarification. When you say thing, you are referring to a human being. Yes, said Susan Atkins, a human being. She went on to tell the jurors that Linda Kasabian remained outside as Tex entered the house through an unlocked window, then opened the front door for Susan and Pat Krenwinkel. Wojtek Frykowski was sleeping on the couch. He opened his eyes as they approached. He seemed to think they were more of Sharon's friends until Tex pointed the gun at him. Wojtek asked who he was. I'm the devil, said Tex Watson, and I'm here to do the devil's work. Next time on Young Charlie, coming down fast. Charlie is convinced that the Beatles are speaking to him directly through their lyrics, guiding his every move. Following the murder of Topanga Canyon music teacher Gary Hinman, Charlie decides to initiate Helter Skelter. On Friday night, August 8, 1969, he sends Tex Watson and 3 of the family women to a house on Cielo Drive in the Hollywood Hills. He leans into the car window and tells them to do something witchy. This is Hollywood and Crime from Wondery. Subscribe to Hollywood and Crime on Apple Podcasts, TuneIn, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast app. To find out more information, read our episode notes and contact us if you have any questions or comments. If you like what you've heard, we'd love you to give us a 5-star rating and review us. And be sure to tell your friends and fans of true crime. We're counting on you to help us spread the word. Young Charlie is written and directed by Larry Brand. Hollywood and Crime is created and produced by Rebecca Reynolds, John Ponder, and Tracy Pattin, and produced by Jim Carpenter. Young Charlie was recorded at The Invisible Studios, West Hollywood, California, and Blue Room Post in Manhattan Beach, California. Executive producers Ben Adair and Hernan Lopez for Wondery.
Wondery.